Hi everyone, this is Shriya,
Hi everyone, this is Sukanya.
and we are back with yet another episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style Season 3, brought to you by Feminism in India.
During the course of this podcast, we've been talking about different work industries and how different individuals navigate gender stereotypes in their own work industries. When we talk about especially popular culture or art, especially visual art and things that we consume, porn is something that we all have engaged with, we all keep engaging with often, but it's also something that we don't speak about as much. It's such a huge part of our lives, our realities, our imaginations, but pornography is also something that whenever spoken about is spoken in a very vulgar or a very propositioned sort of objectified context, and there is no real objective or healthy constructive conversation that happens about how porn is made, how the industry functions, what happens to the artists who work in it, how does the whole thing get orchestrated, etc. So most of porn that is also readily available is made from a very extremely white cis-het male gaze perspective where female pleasure seems very very sidelined as well. So now that the conversation is shifting to ethical porn and feminist creators and everything, the landscape of pornography is also changing, and it is a huge industry. It is a thriving industry. So we, in this episode, we'll be looking into what happens. What does it mean to be a woman in porn? What does it mean to be part of that industry? And what is it that an individual who works in this industry navigates? To have this conversation, we have an amazing guest with an amazing body of work behind her. Shreya, if you could introduce our guest.
Yes, absolutely, Sukanya. We're so happy to have with us Kali Sudhra. Kali is a sex worker, writer, educator, and a lot more. Like these are just, I think, smaller terms, but she's been doing so much around this whole landscape of making porn, of creating porn. So Kali has been dedicated to dismantling structures of white supremacy within feminism and challenging the gatekeeping of feminist spaces. Her main focus of work is into exploring and presenting dissident sexuality, directly challenging white heteronormativity by using porn and various forms of sex work as a medium. She's performed in a number of XConfessions indie adult short films and is one of the most watched performers on the site. And in 2021, she also co-directed XConfessions' first South Asian themed movie, The Saree Shop, with Erica Lust, and that was something which was a first in the sort of a ethical porn that we're talking about. So we're so happy and excited to have you with us, Kali, and talk to you.
Thanks so much. That's I'm blushing. Thank you for that sweet introduction.
All right, so let's delve into the conversation. One of the questions that I'd like to ask you and roll this conversation off is what is it that made you choose to create porn as a career? Especially asking you this because it's not a space that is very easily navigable, and I'm assuming there would have been challenges from within close circles, within larger social circles, etc. So, at what point did you decide to choose to create porn and then decide that, okay, this is a career choice that I'm making? And how did you navigate the initial decision-making process and going about it?
Yeah, I guess I hadn't really planned it all the way through. Like I hadn't like had this in my mind for many years. It was like sort of a situational thing. It started around 6 years ago, I think. I don't know. I don't keep I try not to keep track of the years. And I really kind of started in the industry of like a desire and also frustration, because my frustration was like, the lack of real representation, and my desire was seeing BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color represented in porn without being seen as a fetish. So, every time that I saw, I mean, I didn't really see very many South Asian people in porn, and when they were represented in porn, it was like in mainstream porn, it was very like, it was a fetish, it was a whole category. And yeah, it was frustrating, and I wanted to be able to be a character like just anybody else, and not have the whole focus be on me being South Asian. But yeah, again, I think porn, like my desire also is like, to be able to connect with people that I saw on screen. Porn is all about a fantasy and, connecting with the viewers. And I just always thought, well, how am I supposed to connect with this fantasy that I just can't relate to? I just can't relate to these two very white, very thin, very Western images that are on screen right now. They're just not things that they're not it wasn't my desire, but also wasn't my fantasy. And I just never saw myself represented. So then that's kind of where I got the idea to start performing. I didn't plan on it being a career and like launching into it. I don't think it's ever actually been a full career. It's really difficult being in the porn industry unless you're working in the States in the mainstream porn industry. It's really difficult in Europe and in the indie porn industry to have like stable income because there's not enough work. It's all about funds. So a lot of porn performers do a lot of a host of things, So I got into writing. I started doing workshops around sexuality. It was actually quite cool because, I didn't just focus on porn. I focused on many other things also around porn. And and I got to work with my first big director, Erika Last. And through that, I also did some production for her, and I worked as her talent manager. So it really was just a start to many different paths that opened.
Right. I think something very interesting, and also we've all noticed the thing that you mentioned about the the South Asian people or people of color being depicted as sort of a fetish rather than sexual individuals themselves. And you yourself have created XConfessions first, South Asian porn movie. So do you think like this whole idea of looking at people of color as a sort of fetish rather than sexual individuals is also coming from this larger aspect of the South Asian conservative attitude towards anything sex, like anything sex generally is like a taboo or looked at in a very, okay, no, this is not okay, conservative perspective. So you think that has a huge role to play in the lack of South Asian representation in the porn industry?
Probably, yeah, I would agree. Sexuality is a taboo just in general, but growing up South Asian, I mean, it was a massive taboo. And I also don't blame like my upbringing because of that. I know that a lot of South Asians have a lot of ingrained ideas about sexuality because of our history of being colonized by British people, and I don't think that that things were quite the same before the British arrived. Obviously, a lot of South Asians are known for, I mean, really being historically like in touch with their sexualities. I mean, like, where does Tantra come from, and the Kama Sutra and all of these things, no? These were all obviously made illegal by British folks, and that colonized, well, many parts of South Asia. And then now it's kind of like this legacy of what's proper and British, I guess, well, at least me growing up as an Indian woman. And then now it's like British people who used to be like, kind of like backwards or whatever, conservative, are all of a sudden being able to paint themselves as like sexually liberated. And we're like, gender is a construct. I'm like, yeah, gender is a construct that you made, like a lot of the Southern Hemisphere, like in South Asia, but different countries also in Africa, different countries in South America already had ideas of the third gender. And trans folks were also being included in parts of being trans wasn't like seen as being othered, and British people made it that way. I mean, I know a lot of the sad history of how people that belong to third genders in different in countries that were colonized were super discriminated, were taken away from their general position in society. And these are all direct impacts of colonization. So I don't really blame BIPOC when there's kind of like this conservativeness about sexuality. I mean, yeah, it's long gone colonization now from, well, old school colonization from our countries, and we have to unlearn all of those things that we learned about sexuality. So it's the ball's in our court. But I do understand where those roots come from, of being conservative and being afraid to express our sexuality because we would be punished for it. And it was seen as BIPOC have really been fetishized and sexualized by white folks for centuries, and there's so many different stories. I'm just telling the story of my upbringing, but there's also a lot of Black folks that will talk about how the fetishization and sexualization is directly stemmed from slavery. And so there's a lot of things that are at the root there that we don't really consider when we think about somebody that's BIPOC, that's they're conservative with their sexuality. And when we picture white people as sexually liberated, and it's so sad that we don't actually think way back to where does this thought really come from. I wrote a lot about this in a book that I co-wrote with some friends about the danger of fetishization of BIPOC in the porn industry and these colonial narratives that still exist about our bodies, and how fetishization isn't just making me feel othered, but it's also quite dangerous and destructive for our own self-image. And so I wrote about that a little bit, and about colonial scripts that are usually at the center of sexualization and of BIPOC, and how those effects are still there.
Right. Kali, when we have this conversation about how bodies are represented in porn and who does what and who is exoticized or who is fetishized, and when we open the conversation on ethical porn as to how to sort this and how to sort of disrupt this narrative, how much of a say do you think as a performer you have in the movies that you participate in, when you're just engaged as a performer? Also, this is a workplace, and it's also employment. It's art, but it's also a workplace for you. So, as a woman in porn, how much of a say do you feel that women generally have when it comes to sort of altering these narratives? Performers generally have, to be specific, when it comes to altering narratives and bringing in ideas of ethical porn, focusing on female pleasure, on the specific acts, and talking about how a particular gender feels about it. This is how we feel, this is how maybe we should represent this better. So how much of a say do you have in it, and how do you do you get an opportunity to navigate these kind of decisions as well?
I guess it depends on the company. So ethical, like feminism, can sometimes be a buzzword that has no meaning behind it if there's no action. So I always give this example. H&M and Zara like to say that they have an ethical line, of clothing, which is, there's no way that companies that have been known for been exposed for child exploitation through labor could have any ethics at all, So I mean, and they have an ethical line, or I mean, H&M can print T-shirts that say feminist on them. Does that mean they're feminist? No, not really, So ethics are really subjective, and they change from company to company. They change from person to person. What's ethical for you might not be ethical for me, and that might not be ethical for the next person. We might have different ideas of what ethics are. So for me, if a company really does want to prize themselves as ethical, if that means having good practices with performers, then I would say that they would have to prioritize labor rights over capital. So yeah, that's really difficult, right? Because, you know, it's a company at the end and they want to make money. So a company that really wants to prioritize labor rights over capital, for me, in my eyes, then could be, you know, somewhat considered ethical. And they should also like consider redistributing power within production process, because really, as a performer, we have very little power over our image and autonomy, you know, because at the end of the day, you do sign an image waiver release or image release form where you're just handing over your image to this person. So whatever is edited, produced, pictures, blah, blah, is in the hands of that company. So for me, that's really hard to like actually say that I have autonomy when I sign that away and the company, for example, won't come to me with the first edit and be like, do you like this? Won't show me the first cut of the photo as being like, is there a photo that you don't want in there? I mean, it has to be really in the performer's motivation to go after the company and be like, okay, hey, by the way, you know, it depends on the company. I mean, not all companies are like that. I've worked for companies that have sent me the first edit of the film, where they've sent me, you know, some photos that they liked and asked me my opinion. So, I mean, I think that there's companies that are working towards giving performers more autonomy in that way, but there's still a long road, you know, to center performers' voices. I think it's a really never-ending process of self-revision in order to like label yourself as ethical. For me, the most ethical porn that there can be is, and I know people probably don't want to hear this, but it's just buying porn directly from the performers. So buying clips or things that, so if you find a performer that you like or an artist that you like, actress or actor, and you can follow their OnlyFans if they have one, or ManyVids, or maybe they sell clips on another site. There's a whole host of sites just for fans, like all these websites. For me, that kind of takes out the middle person. So like, I mean, there's still a middle person because OnlyFans still wants to get their cut of their money, you know, obviously they're all companies, but I'm deciding what pictures I want out there, how I want to, like, if I'm making my own clip, how I want to edit it, how do I want to sell it, you know, like, because that's also another big thing that we don't think about. Not only how do I want to be represented physically, like my clothes, my lingerie, my makeup, or whatever, which seem like small things, but are really big things, but also how do I want it to be sold? You know, a lot of the times, you know, I've worked for mainstream companies and porn's been, what do you call it, pirated, and you lose complete control over that too. That's also another thing that's kind of, that we don't really talk about, that still happens. But yeah, I think that buying directly from the performer is the best way to know that you're just supporting directly their work, because performers, when we work for a company, so imagine we work for this amazing production, the movie is a hit and gets into festivals and it generates a lot of revenue. Performers are only ever going to see a one-time fee for their performance. They'll never get any royalties, as what we call them. So an actor who doesn't have sex on screen, like, so whatever mainstream Bollywood or Hollywood actor you could think of, when they produce a movie or they act in a movie and that movie sells a lot of money, they get a small percentage of those sales, and they're able to, you know, constantly profit off their work that they did, you know, where in porn that doesn't exist. So, you know, we get our one-time fee. The movie could be an amazing movie that sells a lot, but then we only ever see that small fee, and we never are able to actually share the revenue with the producer or the director. And so for me, for example, that's a really big thing of ethical porn, in, you know, in commas, is would be redistributing wealth. And these are all really kind of also taboo topics when it comes to money, you know. Everyone's so ethical, but then when it comes to talking about finances and fees and redistributing wealth, then that's like a little bit too, I always become like the most extreme performer then. They're like, oh yeah, Kali, somebody one time called me a social justice warrior, and I'm like, I mean, just because I want to be paid fairly doesn't mean I'm necessarily a social justice warrior, you know? So there's a lot of like interesting parts about ethical porn that we often don't think about. And yeah, I mean, they want to sell it that performers have more autonomy over what happens to our images and stuff like that. But really, there's still a long way to go. And there's all of, like I said, all of those components that we have to consider.
Right. I think this is so interesting that you mentioned this, that, at the end of the day, what is ethical and what does ethical again becomes a very sort of a term which something what is ethical to me might not be ethical to you. Like it's a varying term for people. So, and in the aspect that you said, like how how you want to be represented, how your image is represented is in the hands of somebody else. And like, how is that even then ethical at the end of the day? So in that, in that context, I think something that warrants asking is that, as a workplace in the industry, how gender equal do you feel it is? Because again, it's an industry which is kind of consumed by a lot of cis-het men. So as a woman or as queer individuals, like women and queer individuals, how much of an equal sort of footing do they have in the industry? And considering like, how you said that once you act in a movie and it goes to the market and, it makes money and everything, do you feel there is that gender gap that is there in terms of a male performer and a female or a queer performer? There's that gender gap that exists within the industry.
Yes. I mean, yeah, personally, I don't feel equal to my male counterparts. In porn, men don't age, so they don't have like I hate to say this, but they don't have like an expiry date. Not that anybody has an expiry date. Bodies don't have an, I mean, like until, I mean, if I think about it, I mean, bodies do have an expiry date. We all die one day, unfortunately, the end of the story. But I mean, we don't have an expiry date in the sense that we can enjoy our sexualities until our very last day that we are living, like, I mean, there's no expiry date on our sexuality. That's one thing that a lot of people don't want to hear because they don't want to think of like older people's sexualities, but let's just talk about it. There's no expiry date on sexuality, but in the porn industry, there is some expiry date on women's sexualities, which is so freaking frustrating because it's not there for men. You can see men working in porn into their, I don't know, like 50s, 60s, and they're not labeled as anything as like, mature or whatever. They're just, men in porn. Whereas as a woman, as soon as she passes 35 years old or gets closer to 40, all of a sudden she's being labeled MILF. Like, first of all, it's so unconsensual, like to label somebody as a mother if they don't want to be a mother. Like, it also like these weird, I mean, women should be able to do porn without instantaneously being labeled as such, unless they choose to, because they want to capitalize off of men's fantasies. Like I'm all for women like doing whatever they want with their bodies and making money off men. So if they want to be labeled as a MILF and they choose that, great. But we shouldn't automatically label a woman as a MILF because she's over a certain age, and then not treat men as like, okay, they have no expiration date, like in terms of their, like, no one has an expiration date, like I said before, but I'm just saying like it's not the same standard that men live up to, and we shouldn't receive like this sexist treatment inside the industry, but also outside the industry. You think about it, like they always paint in Hollywood or in movies like women that are 35 plus or 40 plus as being like, if you're single, then you're like desperate, or you're less like, I don't know, you have less value or something because you're not beside a man. Like, it's so outdated. And have you ever thought that probably that woman is probably happier like being single, doing her own thing and not having somebody bothering her, maybe, like we never think about these things, right? And then also in terms of the gender gap in porn, as a brown woman, I must say that it's not only that I live the gender gap, but I also do live a race gap, and that does exist in porn. Yes, in 2022 there is a race gap in the porn industry. I mentioned in the book that I wrote that there's a really horrible practice within mainstream porn of paying white women more to work in a scene, in an interracial scene with a Black person. So for the outside world, it's seen as like a white woman being, edgy and like, reinventing herself by working with a person of color, or actually regularly it's a Black person. And then, but it's not seen as the other way around. Like it's inventive or edgy for a Black person to work with a white person. So often, that's how we see that, like, in that case, gender is secondary to race, and racism is a controlling factor in wages in the porn industry. And actually, to be honest, in most industries, there's often lack of transparency from porn producers around wages, which is really shitty. It's really insulting to think that porn performers and artists are foolish and we don't discuss our wages between us. Of course we do. Of course we do. So if there's any porn producers listening to this right now, I think that they're, tricking us somehow. Like porn performers do have a strong community. You make a lot of friends and kind of family in this industry. And you do talk about things such as working conditions and wages. And so those are things that we're not silent about at all. So if porn producers think somehow that that's something we're not going to talk about, it's definitely something we're talking about. So I think that it's really, again, tying back to ethical porn, another big thing about ethical porn is that there needs to be way more transparency about what's a working wage, what all performers are receiving on set. It's very rare that you go to a set where okay, I'm working beside this, we're calling this an ethical production, and I'm working beside this person. It's very rare that I actually know if this person is making more money than me or not. And I do have a lot of friends that work in production, so they have access to budgets, so then they can see. And it's really tacky. Beyond tacky, it's just discriminatory if you're paying somebody more than another person to be in the scene. And it's completely racist that Black men and Black women receive less than white people for doing the same scene. These are all really big things, really big issues. Things that people, again, like money is such a, it's such a taboo thing. It's almost as taboo as sex, People don't want to talk about that in a transparent way. I must say though, I was recently on a porn production where it was really reassuring that we got all sat down in the beginning, the porn performers, and we all got told about our working conditions, our rights, things like that, and we all were explained that we all were given the same wage, and that really took away this taboo, this insecurity. Am I working in the scene with this person and they're getting paid more? It can make you feel really inferior if you're guessing at that, or if in the past you've worked in a scene where that person made more money than you, so those are all things that really chip away at our identity and how we feel about ourselves and our self-esteem, and then white people are like, you're making it up, it's all in your head. I'm like, it's definitely not. It's definitely a real thing,
Such a white person thing to say.
Yeah, it's all in your, it's not that big of a deal, or people will say, don't you feel like in 2022, we've made so many advances in race, and racism isn't a thing of the past. It's like, no, racism is alive and thriving, especially when we don't talk about it and we just kind of sweep it under the rug. So those are again, the porn industry is really, it's white dominated. So these are big structural things that need to be addressed, that will take time to dismantle. It's a big thing, it's not something small, like a small detail. These are I think these are really ingrained and in this machine, if you think of it that way.
Kali, just listening to you talk, and you've just mentioned how dismantling all these structural and ideological and gaze-related problems would take time, with maybe making baby steps to that space. But XConfessions' first South Asian themed movie, where there is more context about South Asian culture and its relationship with porn and South Asian bodies and everything. So what I'd like to ask you is that, while talking about the lack of nuance and the hypersexualization and the fetishization of people from minority races, races that have been exploited, I mean, non-white people essentially. Do you feel, what are the things that you may have kept in mind, or what are the measures in the creative as well as the executionary space that you had kept in mind when you were making XConfessions movie? And also, do you feel that when more women and when more non-white women and queer individuals come into the production side of it, the storytelling side of it, do you feel that that is what is going to make a bigger change than because there's already a diversity in performers? And then there is the structural power hierarchy that still exists. So I just want to understand, how did you address this when you were stepped into the shoes of a maker, as well as do you feel that more women and more queer individuals and more non-white people stepping into the shoes of makers, of financiers who invest in such productions would change things significantly?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, one of the things that I always advocate for is that it's really hard to feel empowered just putting a person of color in front of the screen. It has to be way more than that. I mean, I don't want to just be like some check on a diversity quota, and just putting a brown or a black person or an indigenous person in front of the screen and being like, empowerment. That's not how it works, really, And there's so many parts of porn, it's not just it's not just the performing, it's the production, it's the post-production, the editing, it's the direction, it's the writing, And so with the Saree Shop, I really wanted to write something that was like from a personal experience, something that had happened to me. I mean, I didn't have sex in the Saree Shop, sorry, to ruin the fantasy for anybody. That was part of a fantasy. Again, porn is a fantasy. But yeah, I wanted to use something from my own personal experience as a South Asian woman to be able to show on screen and to celebrate, really to celebrate brown beauty. Like it's not something that we center, and it's not something that is celebrated. It's always celebrated when it's like a white person performing brown or black beauty, you know what I mean? Like white women appropriating black and brown culture, that's celebrated, but we're not really celebrating, brown and black folks, and their beauty, it's just, it seemed really wild to me that, so I really wanted to celebrate brown beauty on screen. Also, it was really important that my co-performer was also brown. So I found a co-performer that was amazing there. Very cool performer. Their name is Kajal. There was such a nice understanding between us. We also chatted. There was a lot of conversation before the film happened about what things they would feel comfortable with, what things they didn't want to explore. And we really were able to have this organic conversation where we really just took time to see what we wanted to present on camera. We also had like a lot of fun behind the scenes, and just like also sharing our own experiences like off camera about being sexualized or fetishized and like how that affected us in our relationships. And those were really big things that were part like that didn't obviously get shown on camera, but big things that helped me connect to other BIPOC in the industry, because sometimes you can feel really isolated if you're always surrounded by just white performers and white productions. So yeah, it was really interesting. I would have really liked to have more like BIPOC on my production team. It's very difficult in Barcelona. It's also very difficult in terms of finances to like, just fly people in, like, okay, I'm going to fly this DOP, the director of photography in from another country, it's like, it becomes costly. But yeah, those were like important things that I think that could be better for the future. Also in terms of the post-production, I really wish that I could have had more, like, I mean, I'm not really into post-production. I'm just getting my footing in the field. But it was really nice to go into the office with the people that were editing, sit down and be like, okay, this part, no, okay, no, this part doesn't, like, I don't like this take. Let's look at another one. So it was really cool to have my hands in that and really feel like it was more palpable and more like you had more control over what you wanted to show. Also, that, I mean, I just was living out my complete fantasy of being able to have like all these beautiful fabrics, get dressed up, and have somebody doting on me. Like, I love being treated like that. So like for me, it was like, also part of my fantasy, and it was just like, I just love the idea in saree shops in general. I just love like at least when I was in India, that like I would go in and there was just men running around trying to just find what I wanted, and I was just sitting there being like, no, that one, no, like, and men just running around, just like taking out this, like, all these fabrics going everywhere. Like I just loved it so much. Felt like a complete princess. And so then I went with that for one of the films.
Like, this is so interesting. Like you mentioned, Kali, about the saree shop and sarees, and for example, I wouldn't call them props, but like the general cis-het white male idea of porn, or what sexuality or what involves sexual interaction is so focused on penetration and body, and penis, vagina, done. But sex in general, or sexual interactions, or as sexual beings, it differs from person to person. So like, for example, when you said sarees, I could say, like, just taking off a saree itself, it's such a sexual act. I feel like I always, like, this is something that I've always felt like, just there, like when you take off a saree, it's such a brilliantly sexual act. And for that matter, a lot of things, be it other vibrators or other things that you use, those are so rarely talked about in mainstream porn, because you're like, no, there's like a man and there'll be a woman, and then there's sex, and people will enjoy that. So as someone who's also like worked with the other aspects, and like you mentioned, the whole thing about having an emotional connection, having that conversation with your fellow performer, how important do these things become, like when we put aside the whole heteronormative idea of sex, how important do these other smaller things become as a performer, as a creator, but also as someone who is consuming or engaging with porn?
Yeah, like the whole penetrative sex thing is so overrated, and like a lot of the movies that I'm in, like they don't, like a lot of the movies that I'm in, they don't end with like penetrative sex being like the big pinnacle of everything, like in the saree shop, we do use toys. I love using toys, and it's like, I think it's really important, like one thing we don't actually really show, and like in sex, like it's not all about penetration. And like, if we only show porn where it's just like, okay, penis, vagina, present, that's what sex is. And you don't show like a moment where maybe a performer takes out a toy, and like even though that there's a person there that can penetrate them, like people, it blows their mind, like they're like, oh, why would you use a toy if there's somebody there that can penetrate you? Because it's fun to change things up and switch things up. That's what makes sex so exciting, is changing things up, is not doing the boring same old thing that we've always done. For me, it's really important in my work in general to move away from these ideas, also just because of how I experience my sexuality. When I've been with people, like when I've been with people that have penises that know that it's not all about their penis. It's so much nicer to work with that person because like, you know, they can totally decenter themselves, you know,
They're
like if they're
not
not
thinking through their penises.
exactly, yeah. And you know, like also like let's talk about hands and how important hands are, you know, and other parts of the body that aren't, you know, that aren't usually focused on. I think that's also a really interesting thing. You know, we don't really focus on other parts of the body. There was one movie that I shot with Bishop Black, who is my ultimate best friend in porn, and we did a movie for Blue Artichoke Films called Wild Card. It's a very funny movie because I guess it talks about other parts of the body. It's a game that we play, other parts of the body that aren't usually sexualized, and how to play with them. Anyways, it was really cool. So yeah, those are things I definitely like working with. Also, I'm not like I think another thing is that I'm just not really, penetration doesn't really do it for me as so as for other people that have vaginas. I'm sure that penetration isn't the ultimate thing for everybody. Some people it might be amazing. Some people it might be like, nah, you know. And some people like me, it could be like I could do without this for a long time, you know. I'm not going to miss it, you know. So I think that also needs to be shown because it like usually in porn, it's always shown that like women are like desiring to be penetrated. Like we want to be penetrated, you know, and there's not as much focus on other parts that we might be like playful or foreplay or oral or making out or teasing or caresses or massages or whatever. Yeah, so those are things. I mean, I guess porn is one of the things is porn is just such a fantasy that's not really it's not real life, and we don't show that far enough. You know, we're always showing what we think people want to see.
Yeah, so like it's so in like you said, it has such an impact on somebody like an individual growing up because you're watching porn and you're like, okay, people seem to be enjoying this penetration, then why don't I? Okay, and then you don't find that answer out there. So it's, I think, like you mentioned, so important just for also for the sake of representation, that why am I not enjoying it? What's the answer to it? Because it's normal. It's not like there's something wrong with it. It's just a lot of us. So I think that's, yeah, very important. Something very interesting and important that you do mention about
Yeah,
other things.
especially for young people that are watching porn and they like, you know, imagine a young person is watching porn and seeing like, okay, if I don't it sex ends in penetration and the person with the penis coming, you know, like if you watch porn and that's all, that's pretty much probably what you would get, you know, if you're watching mainstream porn and you're not able to discover other types of porn. So yeah, I'm always worried about that. I'm like, I don't want young people to think that that's what sex is, because it's actually not, or it doesn't have to be that way if you don't want it to be. It can be, there's no shame. If you want things to be vanilla, that's great. You want it to be vanilla heterosex, great, but it doesn't have to be for everybody, and especially for the majority of people it's not that way. So it's really important that we're able to show different ways of having fun.
Kali, when we talk about how porn is perceived in the public eye, just how it's consumed and how different associations are formed about what sexual interaction should ideally be, etc. And speaking to you as a performer, as someone who works in this industry, for example, when somebody has a job, when they have a career, it's a very regular thing, like, oh, she works there or he works there, and this is their work timings are over, they come back and they have a personal equation and everything. But do you feel that when it comes to people, especially women in visual media, be it films or be it pornography or whatever, do you feel that there is a certain cultural burden, like a social burden, a burden of gaze, a burden of moral policing that you also unfortunately have to carry into your personal relationships? How easy or difficult, or how is it to be a performer in porn and to also navigate a personal dating life, meet real men in life who have a certain idea about porn and who have a certain misconception about what sex should be, and they learn all of this from a lot of problematic porn. They have a certain gaze and they have a certain idea about porn stars as well. So working in that sort of a profession where the baggage of it is also carried and sometimes reflected onto your personal interactions, what does it feel like to be, to go out there and date while you also have a profession, a thriving career in pornography?
Yeah, I guess it's a challenge for sure, and mainly because of the stigma of doing sex work. People have way more of a problem with it than I do. Like I just treat it as a job and people treat it as something else. I don't generally date, like I just have a good policy of trying not to date men, because I mean, like cis hetero men. I've always considered myself queer. When I have dated cis hetero men in the past and they've had problems with my porn career, it's been like such a big turn. It just turns me off cis men in general even more. Like it just makes me gayer, if that makes sense. Like, I just feel like I feel gayer by the day, like dealing with like hetero cis men. And like it's always really difficult because in my career, obviously a big percentage of the people that are buying my porn are hetero cis men, so I'm always on the edge of being too queer for them to actually want to buy my stuff. And like, trying to sell this fantasy that like, oh yeah, I'm like this like selling this fantasy that's not always like real life. Like I'm sure a lot of the guys know it, like that buy my stuff. I mean, a lot of the guys that have some sort of critical thinking probably know that I'm queer. But then yeah, like in terms of dating, I've dated all genders of people, and it has been a problem sometimes, but mostly with people that just couldn't understand that's just sex work is work and that's it, and it's a separate thing. And working in the porn industry and working in front of a camera is way different than having a private sexual relationship with somebody. And you are performing. And when you're, or even as a sex worker, and you're seeing, if you see a client, you're still performing a fantasy, and it's not, you're performing a fantasy for them, And so, and a lot of sex workers are able to differentiate that. I think a lot of people will say like, oh yeah, if you work with sex for a living, then won't you get tired of sex? I think one thing is having sex and one thing is performing. They're very different for me. I'm, again, how I have sex in front of the camera, like or like perform in front of a camera, is not how I have sex in real life. And I can assure you, like I'm not I definitely don't look like that in real life, like who was the other day, I was talking to my best friend in the States, and we were just like, I was lying in bed just playing video games, and I don't know, like we were chatting, we do video chat, and I'm like, I just wish people could see like see this as just who, like how we are, like how I am. This is like who I am, completely unsexy, and also can be sexy at the same time. And I think that people have ideas of what people in porn are like in their outside world also. They hype us up somehow, and I hate that. I don't want to be hyped up. Like I'm really informal. So when people like catch me on the street doing something, they're like, oh my God, it's you just living your normal life, I think there's like this kind of like fetishization of us is what makes it hard for us to date, because we are just like any other person. I'm not some sort of superstar diva. Also, people that work in porn doesn't mean that they're like experts in sex. They're still going to be awkward and weird and like have their insecurities, like those are things that people don't often tell you. And yeah, I just wish that people would stop making it like some sort of like we're like, I never would use the word porn star. I say porn performer because I'm performing, you know. But yeah, it's just interesting. The whole dating while being a sex worker is just always been really difficult through decades. I'm sure I'm definitely not the first one talking about this. And I think sex workers would just really want the world to know that we deserve love. We're normal people. It's a normal job, and it doesn't have to interfere with how we have sex in our private lives, you know?
Right. I think that this whole thing that, there's this whole one track sort of a mindset that people just sort of live their life with, where they're like, okay, you're this, so you're this, so that they don't want to change that sort of image that they already have set of a certain profession or a certain person. So I think that does play a huge role in this perception that, again, like performing and doing, like having sex, are two very different things, which like people find it hard to understand. So Kali, with that, like I would like to sort of conclude our conversation by asking, what would your message be to younger people? Like we spoke about how like younger people are one of the major consumers of porn, and also someone with whom, like, watching porn affects how they think about their sexuality, or how their ideas about their sexuality and gender develop. So what would your sort of message, or like a thing, like a pep talk, and I wouldn't say a pep talk, but like a small snippet of a message to them would be when they're engaging with porn, and sometimes they will not find what they're looking for and they'll be confused. So what would you want to like sort of tell these younger lot?
Yeah, so many things, I guess. Mainly that porn is a fantasy and doesn't translate to real life. That is the biggest one to keep in mind. Sex in real life looks and feels so different, and that's coming straight from the mouth of a porn performer, you know? So, and I'm not the only one that's saying this. I'm not the first one that said it. I won't be the last one that says it, you know? So, you can trust me when I'm saying it. I'm just, I also would say, like, don't feel pressure to copy what you see on screen. Be creative. It's not real life what you see on screen, and porn is just entertainment like any other form of cinema, like Hollywood, Bollywood. It's entertaining, but it doesn't mean like, we're gonna break out in song and dance because I found a really cute girl on the street, that's not real life. I mean, it would be cool if that was real life, but not real life. So if you really do want to have good sex, communicate with your partner and what you both want to explore and what brings you pleasure. Those are really important things that we really don't see in porn. I mean, oftentimes you see a really hot scene in porn and it's okay, that can turn you on, but it doesn't really teach you like about good communication, because those things kind of are either one, edited out, or two, just not performed in the scene, So porn can be a cool tool to explore fantasies, and that's not a bad or shameful thing. But just like remember, on screen, we're actors, and in real life, we're just normal people like you that have awkward things that happen during sex, that have our own insecurities. Nobody's an expert in anything. Like, yeah, just not to kind of romanticize the people that you see on screen, because everybody is super unique and different and special. Everyone is super, like, has their own quality that's super special. So that might sound really cheesy, but I do really mean it. I really do mean it. I think that everyone has really something to bring to this life. And just to not, like, you don't romanticize the people that you see on screen, like, I mean, you are great and you are amazing as you are, and you don't need to aspire to be the person that you're watching on screen, or to have that kind of sex life, because I assure you what you're seeing on screen is not the real sex life of the person, at least in my case. Yeah. I can't speak for everybody else, maybe there are people that have that real fun. I have no idea, I'm kind of like lights out person by 11 p.m. So I'm not living this crazy fantasies than I am in porn.
Oh, thank you, Kali. I mean, this conversation has been, it's been intense, it's been fun, and it's also absolutely been, it's demystified a lot of things that are, like you said, romanticized about the profession, about porn performers, about the whole process of intimacy and pleasure and everything. And I feel that what I would really, really, really take away from this conversation is the last cheesy bit that you said about how everyone's so different and everyone's temperaments are different and everyone's made of those awkward little details and insecurities and everything. And, basically to humanize our bodies and our experiences and to not put these things on a pedestal. I think the things that you feel were cheesy are the most important takeaways for me from this conversation. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us, for taking the time out for this, and for being extremely honest and extremely candid about your work and your life and your experiences. Thank you so much. We hope you had fun having this
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was great. I hope to talk to you all in the future.
Definitely, we'd love to. I mean, this was just one of the most candid conversations we've had, and it's been a pleasure, honestly. Thank you so much. With this, we come to the end of season 3 of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style season 3. It has been a wonderful journey where we've talked to so many women across different fields, understanding how gender stereotypes operate in their fields, and we've got so much insights and so much to think about. Sukanya, what do you think? Was it for you?
Shriya, it has been deeply insightful. It's been very exciting. It's been some fun conversations, all of them very loaded conversations and very, very important conversations. So that way, it's been an enriching, exciting, insightful experience for me to just be able to speak to so many different people. It's been really exciting for me to speak to so many different women who come from so many different work areas to understand what it's like to be women in those respective fields. It's been eye-opening, and I believe everyone who's listening to us also finds as much value in these conversations as we have. We've enjoyed having these conversations. We've learned from them. We hope they add some value to your lives as well. And if you think you like it, or if you have any feedback, or if you have any criticism that could make us, make our content better, do write into us, do listen to us. There are 2 other seasons prior to season 3. All of them are available on all your favorite streaming platforms. Do tune in, do listen, do write to us, and keep supporting us.
Yes. And as we close our season, we are very thankful to everybody who listened to us, who wrote to us, who gave us the feedback, who helped us make this better. And we hope that you had a fun time and you had insights that you could take from it. So this is Shriya and Sukanya signing off from season 3 of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style. Bye.